mind getting back on track. Okay. Last week we started a series in the book of Ruth. And we zoomed in on this family whose entire world had been thrown into chaos. It was during the times of the judges. There's no king on the throne of Israel, which not only is a political statement for the people at the time, it's also a theological statement for the people at the time, because what it means is that they had also rejected God as their king. And the book of Judges ends by saying that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And our response to that was, uh-oh. Some of you were here last week and paying attention. Yes, that's very good. And so we learned that not only was there a context of chaos around this family, but as we were introduced to this family in a day and age where the men, the husbands, the fathers were really the sole protectors and providers of their family units, Naomi's husband dies. Her sons, who were married to her two daughters-in-law, also die. No one's on the throne. No one's doing anything that makes any sense, even by the time they get to the end of their nose. And the providers and the protectors are dead. So what are they going to do? Would you please meet me in your copy of God's Word in the book of Ruth? The book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 6. And if you forgot a Bible or you don't have one with you this morning, there should be a hardback black Bible somewhere underneath the chair or row in front of you. And if you are looking on in that copy, you can find the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verse 6 on page 208. 208 of those hardback black Bibles. Ruth, chapter 1, verse 6. I know it says at the top of your worship guide, we're going to go through verse 25. I don't have time to go through verse 25, mostly because the chapter ends at verse 22. That was my fault. My fault. Some transposed some number wrong months ago on my little preaching spreadsheet that helps our team know what's coming up. That was my fault. So through verse 22 is where we'll go in chapter 1. But initially, I'd like to read into your hearing verses 6 through 15, and then also verse 20. Ruth, chapter 1, verse 6. If you're there, say, I'm there. If you're ready, say, I'm ready. Then, the text says, she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Now, just so you know, those are all good things. This is a person of the promise returning to the land of the promise and to the God of the promise. So there's a problem when it says in verse 8, but Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. And she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back. Everybody say, turn back. Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? And then what does she say again? Verse 12, what'd she say? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night, and should bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Now skip down with me to verse 20. She said to them, do not call me Naomi, which means sweet delight. Call me Mara, which means bitterness. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I'd like to title the message this morning, The Inner Life of Mara. I think it's really important that we take note of what is happening inside of Naomi. Because it can be, if we are not vigilant, what happens inside of us. I want to look at all the indications that the original author gives to us as to what is happening in the thinking and the desires of Naomi in this passage. Because I think if we walk the same path she walks, we'll end up in the same place she ends up. The inner life of Mara. Look with me again at verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. Now, why is the author telling us all this? Well, remember that Naomi married Elimelech, who was like, not just from Bethlehem, he was like from Bethlehem, right? He had deep family roots in Bethlehem, and he uproots himself and Naomi, and they have 2 sons, and they'll go to Moab, first to sojourn, then they put roots down there. Moab, by the way, does not worship the God of Israel. They worship a plethora of other gods who are content sharing the throne of people's hearts with each other, not like Yahweh. Not like Yahweh. Not like the God of the Old and New Testament. The God of covenant, the God of promise. He's not content sharing. And their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, marry 2 Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And now Elimelech's dead. Mahlon is dead. Chilion is dead. And get this, Naomi is left with her 2 daughters-in-law. Is this easy? Now, some of you are being careful about how you answer because your mother or daughter-in-law is in earshot, which is wisdom, all right? This is not easy. This is not easy. Why is she arising with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab? It says in the second part of verse 8, for she had heard in the fields of Moab. Well, what's Naomi doing in the fields? Well, it was ancient practice that the welfare systems in this day and age were that the people would go out, the people who were in need would go out behind the reapers in a field, the guys who were paid to go out and bring the bulk of the harvest in. And these gleaners would come in behind the reapers and pick what they needed. It is likely, the text doesn't say explicitly, but we're going to see this modeled later in the book. It is likely that Naomi was out there gleaning, getting the secondhand stuff in order to make ends meet. It's not an esteemed place to be. And she hears in the fields of Moab, it says in verse 8, that the Lord had visited his people. Well, that's good. The first part of this phrase almost makes it sound like, ooh, maybe she's starting to come around to needing to be back with the people of promise and the land of promise and serving the God of the promise. But then it says at the very end of verse 8, and given them food. Now, I don't want to judge Naomi. I got enough problems of my own to worry about hers. But the author seems to be indicating to us it's a little bit of a mixed motivation. Yes, the Lord had visited, but in some ways, even though Elimelech, her husband, is dead, his decision-making process seems to still kind of be intact in the family. It was a famine that drove him to Moab. He's not following the Lord, he's following the food. Well, how many of you, if you had kids to feed, would follow the food? I get it. I get it. I'm not saying it's the faithful thing to do, but I'm saying I understand it. And this decision-making in verse 6 sets them into verse 7. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So have they packed up and are they on their way? Yes. But, it says in verse 8, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. What? Naomi knows the promises of God. She knows who God is. She has an opportunity to take 2 willing pagans, uproot them, and put them under the promises of God. And she's like, no, don't come with me. Why? This doesn't make any sense. There's nothing in verse 8 that would give any indication as to why she's doing this. Now, she tries to cover it with some nice language. Did you guys notice the nice language when we read through verse 8 for the first time? May the Lord, that's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, which means the covenant name of God, Yahweh, is being used there. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. She's blessing them. Just north of a request and just south of a prophecy. A blessing. She's blessing them with nice language. I've got some friends who are from the South. I was born and raised in the Northwest, but got some friends from the South. They got a phrase, oh, bless his heart, in which you say, bless his heart, but you don't mean bless his heart. It's nice language. But her actions are proving there's something else going on here. You know one of the ways that the Lord might deal kindly with them as they have dealt with the dead and with her? By them following her back home. She's saying one thing and doing another. Why? Verse 9. The Lord, there it is, grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Well, that must mean new and upcoming husbands, because the house of their husband is her house. Then she kissed them, which is likely a euphemism for a goodbye kiss, like, all right, see you later. A goodbye kiss. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. These two women who have stood by her side, I mean, it's been at least 10 years, probably closer to 15 or 20. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. I mean, that should settle it right there. But in verse 11, Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? She's starting to lay out maybe some of the practical reasons not to come along. And to be honest with you, in a day and age where the men are the sole providers, protectors of the household, her logic isn't all that far off. Verse 12, she says it again, turn back. I did a little bit of digging into that Hebrew word or a phrase for turn back, and one of the places that it's used is in the book of Exodus. Some of you might be familiar with the story where the Lord leads the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the final stroke of deliverance is that he parts the Red Sea and they walk across on dry land, and then Pharaoh's army comes in overnight, and in the day the waters turn back. Return to the natural state of things. That's what Naomi is urging them to do. Turn back. Get back to the natural state of things in verse 12. My daughters, go your way. That's really important. One of the things that we saw last week was that everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes, right? And we've got some phrases in our society that represents everybody doing what's right in their own eyes. Phrases like follow your, you do, and let's add to that, go your way. Not God's way, not my way as I follow God. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? By the way, this is, those of you who study debate, you know that this is a logical fallacy called reductio ad absurdum. It's taking something to such an absurd degree that it makes the original argument sound ridiculous, even though it's not. Would you therefore wait until they were grown? Of course not. That's not what we're saying. Would you therefore refrain from marrying? That's not what we're saying. We're not talking about that right now. No, my daughters. And then, have you ever noticed that when you let somebody talk long enough, the conversation erodes away all the facade, and what is truly in their heart starts to come to the surface? The Bible has a phrase for this: from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter for me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Verse 14, then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. From the context and from some scholars that I agree with, it's like, well, I'm going to do it through tears, but see you later. But Ruth clung to her. She's now told Ruth to get lost twice. And Ruth is like, no. And then the erosion of the conversation continues to expose Naomi's heart in verse 15. And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. God's Naomi knows to be false. Go your way. You do you. Do what's right in your own eyes. Is Ruth going to give up? Verse 16. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. Woo! Ruth calls it like it is. That's exactly what Naomi's doing. Naomi, knowing that the God of the promise and the people of the promise and the land of the promise, and now, as she's heard in the field of Moabs, the promises of the promise are all that way. And she's telling Naomi, no, you return to your old gods and go back. And the question is, why? But Ruth says, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. And then she says this, for where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Okay. Well, that's some commitment. We're going to be doing some traveling as a family this summer. Y'all aren't welcome. Y'all stay here. You're not going where I go, and you're not lodging where I lodge. I mean, that's some commitment. That's some commitment. It's not because I don't love you. But then she gets even deeper in the commitment. Your people shall be my people. I'm ready to put away my national identity. And not just my national identity, because she says, your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. This isn't just a geographical change, it's a worldly identity change, and it is a theological identity change. How seriously are you taking this, Ruth? She says in verse 17, where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Now, you need to know that the God of the Old and the New Testament, Yahweh, the God of the promise, is a covenant-making, covenant-keeping God. Not contract-making, contract-keeping, covenant-making, covenant-keeping. What's the difference between a covenant and a contract? Well, a contract, Zeb knows contracts. He does work with contracts. Zeb works on roofs. So You're in the sermon now, bro. So Zeb and I made a contract, and I'm like, I will pay you this much if you do this, this, and this to my roof, and I don't pay him. As much as Zeb loves me, that contract's done. He's not doing it. If Zeb and I set up an arrangement, and he's like, hey, I'll work on your roof, pay me this much, and then he doesn't come do it, as much as I love Zeb, I'm not paying him. Contract's done, because a contract only takes one person to break. But a covenant, if Zeb and I were in a covenant for roof work, even if I don't pay him, he's still going to show up and do it. If we were in a covenant for roof work, even if he doesn't come do it, I'm still going to pay him. And the good news, this is good news, I'm trying not to preach too early. The good news about this is that God is a covenant-making, covenant-keeping God, and that means that when you are faithless, which you are, from time to time, at least, he's still faithful. It means that the covenant between you and him would take both of you to break. And he never fails. So then why on earth is Naomi, from Bethlehem, Naomi, a child of the promise, talking like this is a contract? And Ruth, the Moabite pagan, is talking like it's a covenant. That's a word for us, church. Sometimes the people who shouldn't know better than the people who should know better. But I don't want to judge Naomi. I got enough failures of my own. Here's what I can say about Naomi. There was something along her life with Ruth that caused Ruth to have some sort of trust in the God that she was going back to. Maybe she wasn't representing very well right now. Can somebody say that about you? That maybe even though you don't represent perfectly all the time, by and large, they see enough of the God that you follow in you that even when you're not representing well, they'll be like, oh yeah, but how about the God you were talking about like earlier when you weren't being like this? Verse 18, and when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said, how much? No more. Now, I have had to learn, and sometimes I'm hard to teach. I have had to learn primarily from the wise women in my life. That saying nothing is saying something. That sometimes we say as much, if not more, in what we don't say as we do in what we do say. And so I can tell you that this, she said no more, in verse 18, was a loud silence on the way back to Bethlehem. Maybe the only thing that could have made Ruth feel more unwanted than the conversation about don't follow me and go home was when she said nothing the rest of the trip. Does that deter Ruth? No. Verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? Is this sweet delight coming back home? She said to them, do not call me sweet delight, Do not call me Naomi, call me bitterness. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Now she's talking the truth. Not the truth about who God is, the truth about how she feels. This is the path that I see in this text that I'm nervous we could all walk if we're not careful. And so I've got a list illustration here for you. I'd like to title it 3 Landmarks en Route to Bitterness. Every year, my family and I would drive to Pocatello for Thanksgiving. That's where my dad grew up. And we pass landmarks. I can't tell you any of the street names on the way there, but I can tell you that when we pass that grain silo, we're 90 minutes out. I know the landmarks. There's some landmarks en route to bitterness that are surfaced in this passage, that are surfaced maybe in your heart. Maybe you've experienced some of these. Here's the first one. First landmark en route to bitterness. I am my feelings. When your feelings stop being something you have and start being something that has you, you're on your way to bitterness. I don't just feel angry, I am anger. Would your family say that about you? I don't just feel abandoned, I am abandonment. I don't just feel overlooked, I am overlooked. This is who I am. You might catch yourself saying things like, you know me, no one takes me seriously. You know me, I'm always speaking my mind. Yeah, why is that your identity? Because you are your feelings, and I'm warning you, it's the first stop, first landmark on route to bitterness. That's where Naomi's at. You can see it. She's like, do not call. I know my name sounds like sweet delight. You call me bitterness. That's who I am now. I left Naomi. I'm coming back bitterness. Warning. That's the first landmark en route to bitterness. I am my feelings. If you keep on driving, you'll get to the second landmark. God is my feelings. Now, I'm not trying to tell you your feelings don't matter. I'm not trying to tell you your feelings aren't real. I'm just trying to tell you that often your feelings are wrong. You're not wrong for having them. They're just not telling you the truth. They're not telling you the truth about who you are, and they're not telling you the truth about who God is. We see this in Naomi. Not only does she call herself bitter, but she says she's bitter because God Almighty has dealt very bitterly with her. And here she is rolling into town with a daughter-in-law who would not give up on her. But she can't see it. Because she's bitter and God's bitter. If you keep on driving past I am my feelings and God is my feelings, the last landmark before you arrive in a world of bitterness is my feelings are God. And this is where you start sacrificing your relationships, your employment, your church family, your relationships with your kids, your finances, your time, your energy. You start laying them up on the altar of how you feel right now and sacrificing them to the God of your feelings. That's exactly what Naomi did with Orpah. And she tried to do it with Ruth. Ruth crawled off the altar. It's like, no, we're not sacrificing this based on how you feel. Because if you were right in what you told me before, there's a God behind you, and I want to get to him. 3 landmarks en route to bitterness. I am my feelings. God is my feelings. My feelings are God. Why does she feel this way? Look, verse 21. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity, chaos upon me? Some of you know exactly how Naomi feels. And that's why I'm not up here to judge her this morning. Man, I've been here. I've been here. Believing my feelings so much that they start to define who I am, they start to define who I see God as, and they start to define the actions that I take and sacrificing the people around me on the altar of how I feel. And so before I get to our big takeaway, I've got an anti-takeaway. Bitterness is viewing God's character through the lens of your circumstances. I'm gonna be an expert in what is happening to me and how I feel about it. I'm gonna become an expert in that. I'm gonna get it dialed in, and I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna look at God through it. And then you end up looking at this fun house mirror version of who God is. It completely distorts his character in your perception. That's bad news. But we didn't put all this together this morning so I could preach bad news to you. Look with me at verse 23, or excuse me, 22. Making sure you're all paying attention. Y'all with me? Y'all with me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem, which we learned last week literally means the house of bread. At the beginning of barley harvest, the Lord is visiting his people. He is causing the food to increase. And even though Naomi can't see it, they come into the house of bread at the beginning of bread season. God is miraculous. She can't see it, but God so has her. And some of you, that's you, and you have brought your bitterness in with you this morning because when you look at God, you look at him through the lens of your circumstances. And I just want to invert it. I want to allow the text to invert it this morning. If you take nothing else away from our time together, I want you to take this. Delight is viewing your circumstances through the lens of God's character. Man, don't become an expert in what's happening to you and how you feel about it. Become an expert in the character of a God who never fails, who is always chasing you down. Become an expert in God's character. Because if you become an expert in God's character and you start looking at your circumstances through the lens of who God is, instead of looking at who God is through the lens of your circumstances, you know what you'll find? You'll find delight. And when you pull into the house of bread at the beginning of bread season, you'll be able to see it. And when somebody's alongside of you who won't give up on you, even when you try to make them give up on you, you'll be able to see it because you are looking at your circumstances through the lens of God's character rather than the other way around. While everybody else is doing what's right in their own eyes, the author leans into this beginning of barley harvest. This is a family who's finally looking beyond today and tomorrow and next week. They're starting to live into a heading that God is giving them. now, how many of you are deeply bothered by the clock that's not working up here? It's set for 11 a.m., which is when we started. This clock is, like Naomi, is out of sync with what's really real. I know that because I pulled the battery out of it. It's not in sync with what's really real. And yet, in the last 24 hours, it's been right twice. And between now and next week, it'll be right 14 times. We're going to see Naomi get some things right in this book. She's going to get some stuff right. She's going to make some right moves and some right actions. But it doesn't mean she ever actually syncs up with reality. As the old adage goes, even a broken clock's right twice a day. You might be in the same boat. There might be moments in your life that you can look back on and you're like, oh man, see, I was calling it right there. Oh man, see, I was calling it right there. My question is, were you actually in sync with what is most ultimately true? And what is ultimately true is not what's happening to you. What's most ultimately true is not how you feel about what's happening to you. What's most ultimately true is that there is a God who has made a way for you, and he doesn't do contracts. He does covenant. And so this is a call for those of you who, if we polled the people who are closest to you, would look back over the last few years and say, I've become a bitter person. I'm just waiting and anticipating God's failure. I'm so bitter that I chase off the people who try not to fail me. And to come back to delight. When we feel the world's brokenness, we feel the darkness around us. But Jesus is our hope. God will not fail, even when